Hello, bonjour. We're back again with the Brazilian Week CCBC Online Festival. My name is Paulo de Castro Reis, and I'm the Executive Director of CCBC. Welcome to the Brazilian Week Online Festival, a digital event organized by the Chamber of Commerce Brasil-Canadá in partnership with the Brazilian Embassy in Ottawa and the Brazilian consulates in Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver, and sponsored by Air Canada. The festival presents more than 20 webinars covering three main content areas: business opportunities, innovation, and Brazilian culture. Besides, the Brazilian Week website offers more than 200 free contents of culture. Again, the Brazilian Week website offers more than 200 cultural contents. I would like to start this session by calling Rafael Manginni, Marketing Director, Latin America of Maple Bear, and the coordinator of CCBC's Education Committee to moderate this session. Welcome, Rafael.
Hi, hello, Paulo. Good evening. Can you hear me well? Is everyone?
Yes, excellent.
Hear me? Great. Thank you so much for inviting us to participate in this panel. It's really a big honor, and we're always very happy to participate in all those initiatives. Paulo had this fantastic idea because we had this Canadian Week back in the beginning of July. And so the idea was also in the Brazilian Week on September 7th to present a little bit about Brazil and how especially Canadians have an experience with Brazil. It's always very interesting because we have lots of stereotypes. We were talking these days with Peter and Rebecca in a meeting that, we were looking into talking with the students and trying to encourage them to have exchanges with Maple Bear schools in other countries. And one of the ideas was to, what do you know about Canada? What do you know about Brazil? What do you know about India? And so on and so forth in the 20 countries where Maple Bear currently operates. And so when you think about Canada, what first comes to your mind? And people say, oh, it's cold, snow, bears, hockey, and about Brazil is the same thing. What do you think more when you want to talk about Brazil? Carnival, football, summer, and such adjectives and experiences. So the idea today was just Paulo asked us to invite some members of our Canadian team. As you know, Maple Bear is a big network of schools. We have over 450 schools throughout the world in 20 countries, and we operate almost 200 schools here in Brazil. And those schools are conducted with the partnership and the help of Canadian educators who come to Brazil. We have academic directors who actually live in Brazil for quite a few years, or educators who come down to Brazil and will visit schools in all Brazilian regions. Go to Acre, to Ceará, to the northeast, to the central-east, to Brasilia, to the south of Brazil. So they really, sometimes those members of our Canadian team get to know Brazil more than we Brazilians do, because they really travel around and get to have contact with lots of different cities. So the idea today was just to have a very informal chat with Peter Visser. Let me present you Peter. Peter was the academic director here in Brazil for over 2 years at the Maple Bear Central Office. Before that, he was the principal, the academic director at Maple Bear in Belo Horizonte, so he lived quite a while in Belo Horizonte as well. But Peter, as academic director here in Brazil, he really traveled around, and he had a very big experience outside of Brazil. He was a principal in Kuwait, for example, for quite a few years. Has a long experience as an educator in Canada. So the idea here was just to talk a little bit about how Peter got to be in Brazil, the experiences he had, and so on and so forth. And also let me present you Rebecca Manning. Rebecca is the head of our Toronto office. Maple Bear has an office in Toronto, and Rebecca is the head there. She takes care of all the, management procedures. We have a big team there, and so she integrates all the operation, the Brazilian operation and the Latin America operation with the Canadian global operation in Canada. So, and Rebecca has a very nice experience. She's married to a Brazilian. So I think that she, probably is the best person to talk a little bit about, what Brazilians are like and, what was surprising, what was not. And so that's the idea today. So just opening the mics to Peter and Rebecca. Peter, would you like to present yourself a little bit?
Well, thank you very much, Rafael. Boa noite a todos. It's a pleasure to connect with Brazil after 4 wonderful years in Brazil. And Rafael summarized my career in terms of education as a teacher and principal in Canada, and then principal and teacher in the Middle East in Kuwait for about 14 years. And then fortunately, a principal in Belo Horizonte and academic director. So this was a wonderful opportunity for me to be involved in so many different aspects in education. And most recently, of course, in Brazil. And I look forward to talking a little more about my experiences in Brazil in a few minutes.
Okay, Rebecca, would you like to tell us about yourself a little bit?
Sure. So as Rafael already mentioned, I'm living in Toronto, but I had the opportunity to live in Sao Paulo for about 2.5 years. I was there from November 2013 until July 2016, working with an organization called Wall Street English, which is actually how I'm connected to Rafael and Maple Bear today. The CEO of that company is our CEO of Maple Bear Latin America now. That's Arno Krug. So through, I'm really excited to have the opportunity to talk about some of my experiences living in Brazil and also continuing to live with Brazil, as my husband is about 10 feet over there as he studies in Canada, and we're starting to make our life here. So thank you for this opportunity to be able to talk about our experiences in Brazil. Onward.
Okay. So another point, please, if you have any questions, if you want to, to ask anything, to comment, to participate, please use the chat. It's really very informal and very open. So we're here just for a very informal and a nice chat. And Peter, before you had the opportunity to come to Brazil, do you remember what you knew about Brazil? Did you know anything about the country? What did you usually hear about Brazil?
Largely, I would say from the Canadian perspective, we know Brazil with the football, the fine food, the many wonderful places to visit, the friendly people. That is the perception that Canadians have about Brazil. Unfortunately, Canadians haven't largely had Brazil on the radar to visit. We're next door to the United States. Europe, of course, has always been attractive, and Asia as well. So I see that Canadians have traveled there probably more frequently than South America. But after my experience in Brazil, and it was my first experience coming to Belo Horizonte and then going to Sao Paulo, that was my first experience in Brazil. And so it opened my eyes to the fact that, Brazil is like Canada. We have friendly people, wonderful opportunities to visit different places. And so, after you get over the hurdle of the language, Brazil becomes Canada in so many different ways. Different ways in terms of the culture, but the same in terms of the people. But what Brazil has is that joie de vivre. The Brazilians love music. They love socializing, as is witnessed by the people in the restaurants and the bars in every city that you go to. And so it is a comfortable opportunity for people to go to Brazil and start exploring the country. The language is a little bit of a hurdle, but other than that, it's very a comfortable opportunity to explore and be united with the people.
How about yourself, Rebecca? Did you know anything about Brazil before coming to the country?
I did quite a bit of reading in the months leading up to because I went to Brazil for work. And I was working with, I said, Wall Street English. This is a company, I had been working for them in Moscow, Russia, and I took an intercompany transfer. I knew that the work culture was going to be drastically different going from Moscow to Sao Paulo, and the way that I operated in a workspace, I was going to need to adapt significantly from kind of a more direct hierarchical management system that I operated in Moscow to where I was going in Sao Paulo, to something a little bit less direct and something on the surface more friendly. I mean, in the end, you're achieving the same goal. So I found it necessary before moving to Brazil to do a lot of reading on the differences in the work culture so that I could be prepared and treat people in a way that was respectful culturally, locally. I didn't want to start off on the wrong foot. That being said, before that few months before I went to Brazil, I echo what Peter said. I mean, of course, I knew what Brazil was. It's one of the biggest countries in the world. It's one of the most populated countries in the world. But I mostly just kind of knew what the stereotypes were and who some of your famous football players were. And I didn't know a lot. For example, Sao Paulo, you know, Rio is a famous city internationally. And for whatever reason, at that point, when I was coming in 2013, Sao Paulo, I didn't know a lot about it. So to suddenly arrive in Sao Paulo, which is the biggest city in South America, it's really overwhelming to think, okay, this has been here the whole time and there's so much culture and life and warmth here. And I didn't know anything about this. So even reading in advance of that doesn't really prepare you for it. And for realizing, I mean, like Peter said, there's this whole incredible, diverse country that, because it's more common for Canadians to go to the US or to go to Europe, or, you know, when we look at going to South America, we often fall just short of it and go to the Dominican because you can get an all expensive trip for $1,000 or something. How much I was really missing out up until that point in my life where I got that opportunity to go to Brazil.
Mm. Some people say that there are 3 stages when you move to a different country. The first stage is that you were amazed that everything was wonderful. Wow, this is marvelous. This is great. You know, the second stage is when you just start missing things that you're in your home country. Said, okay, I miss this, I miss that, and so on. The third stage is that when you just get to, okay, this is a new reality. When you really get settled and you get a part of everyday life. How did you feel when you arrived here, Peter? First, what were your difficulties in terms of meeting meeting new people, the new teams, or opening a bank account, on bureaucracy, or what pretty much was your first experience when arriving in Brazil?
Well, to follow up on what Rebecca said, you know, when you talk about Brazil, you talk about Sao Paulo, you talk about Rio. And so the plane landed in Sao Paulo and I'm thinking, holy smokes, I'm in Sao Paulo. Then I took a transfer to Belo Horizonte and I get off the plane and I meet people. People were very friendly and possibly because I was an older gentleman that maybe they felt sorry for me because of the language. So the barrier was the language, but once I got over that, once I learned a few words and I had a smile, I was able to navigate the challenges, not only at the airport, but just the initial settlement in Belo Horizonte. I was fortunate that there were the owners had picked me up at the airport, got me settled in the hotel, and from there I was able to navigate living in the city slowly, and then before you know it, like you said, Rafael, it becomes familiar to you. And I look back and I don't believe that other than family and friends, of course, I wasn't missing much from Canada because Brazil was so unique, so different, and it was wonderful to be there. The weather was amazing. The shops were interesting. The food was great. So I was starting to enjoy the experience. And very rapidly, I felt myself immersed in the culture. And then when I went to the school as principal and met the parents and the students and the teachers, I found, you know what? Children are the same, the students are the same, parents, teachers, they're the same as they are in Canada, same as they are in the Middle East, in Kuwait, where I was. Kids are kids, students are students, parents are parents, and teachers are well-intentioned. They have the interest of the students at heart. And so there were so many similarities that allowed me to adjust to Belo Horizonte and Brazil very quickly.
How about yourself, Rebecca? So when you first arrived here, how did you feel? We talked a little bit about São Paulo, and so what do you see in terms of differences and similarities? You know, when you just arrived, where did you think, okay, this is exactly like Toronto, or this is nothing? You know, this is totally different. Did you have such perceptions when you arrived?
When I arrived, my comparison point, I am going to make the comparison to Canada, but immediately on arrival in Brazil, my adjustment period, the comparison was to Russia, because I visited Canada for about 3 months before I came from Russia. So I had that as my direct comparison point. And Russia's a much colder culture. You have some of the similar issues in terms of bureaucracy and kind of the scope of the city. Moscow is a huge city, so is Sao Paulo. So when I arrived in Sao Paulo, that made the transition a lot easier. I think if I had been coming directly from Toronto and had been living in Toronto for many years and didn't have international experience, then some things that would have been a big adjustment were, for example, when I moved into my apartment, the organization that I worked for had set me up in a nice neighborhood in Moema in Sao Paulo, and nothing to complain about. They took me to the grocery store. You know, they got me all set up when I moved there. And they said the internet is going to be installed on Tuesday. So on Tuesday, the gentleman shows up to set up my internet. And he asks me, it takes a while because I don't speak Portuguese at this time. It takes a while for me to understand. He's looking for the modem. Of course, I don't have a modem. I just moved in. Why would I have the modem? He thought the modem existed in the apartment. And he said, okay, so they decided they would come back in a few days with the modem. Somebody else comes back in a few days, and he wants to know if I know where the modem is. This happened about 3 times, and then on the 4th trip, finally I get the internet installed. It took about 10 days. But the culture in Brazil, at least in that part of Brazil, is very warm. The people are very warm. The gentlemen that were delivering this service, or maybe not exactly delivering what I was hoping, they were so friendly about it and so apologetic that they kept showing up without my router and not connecting my internet, that honestly, yes, that can be frustrating, but it's really hard to stay mad at somebody who's being so nice about it. So the things these different hurdles that you have to deal with that can be frustrating if you're not used to this level of bureaucracy. And certainly in Toronto, to give you a contrary experience, my husband, when we moved to Ottawa in 2016, when I left Brazil, he got a bus pass in Ottawa. We paid for our bus cards, and I go, okay, let's go get the bus. He goes, no, wait, we have to register our bus card. I said, what are you talking about? No, you don't. You have a card, you just use it on the bus, you're done. He said, no, like, you know, in Sao Paulo, we have to go to Pinheiros. I'm like, no, that you don't live in Brazil anymore. So this would have been, I think, a very difficult adjustment if I didn't have that experience already going through it in Russia. But that being said, as long as you're surrounded by, I believe Peter had this as well, and I had it with Wall Street, an organization that supports you with these hurdles, they're surmountable.
Okay, great. You were saying about how warm people are, and this is really a self-image of Brazilians. And whenever we have calls with our team in Canada, they have this perception, oh, Brazilians hug each other so much. What are you doing in this COVID times? How can you live with that? No parties, no hugs. And I think there is the opposite as well. Whenever we have a new member of the Canadian team coming along to the central office in São Paulo, some people, especially the new people in the office, will look at, okay, there is a Canadian, so he's probably much colder and more distant than, I have to be careful, or I have to keep my distance. And some of the, there are such, we can see such concerns sometimes with the team. And when Peter arrived, he was the first one to institute the mosquito killing championship inside the office, and was really the person who was really promoting everyone. Let's go to the bar and let's do, and it was really a big integrator of everyone in the office. Did you notice such behavior from Brazilians when you arrived, that people that what they thought about Canadians, and do you think this influenced the way they related to you?
Well, when I came to Brazil and I saw the restaurants and bars packed with people, starting at 5 o'clock or 6 o'clock, I thought, well, you know what? The Brazilians, they work hard just so they can go to the bars and the restaurants and enjoy after work. But when I realized that at the school, but also at the Nickelberg Central Office in Sao Paulo, the Brazilians work very, very hard. And I venture to say they work harder than Canadians. They spend longer hours at the office. People were there at 7 in the morning. They were there till 7 at night. So the Brazilians were people who I discovered were hard workers, but very hard socializers as well. They want to enjoy life. And so this became the understanding I had, and I was able to jump in Belo Horizonte and also in Sao Paulo with wonderful people in the office, but also wonderful people around my apartment where I lived. And so, yes, I had similar experiences in Kuwait and of course in Canada, but it was special in Brazil. The warmth, the acceptance, and the smiles that I received when I tried to speak my Portuguese. I think the Brazilians really appreciated that, the effort, and they helped me with it. And so I think once they realize that you are immersing yourself in a culture, that you're not standoffish, you jump in with both feet, they embrace that and they want to associate with you. They want to do things with you, and they want you to become part of their network.
Great. Did you notice anything on that front, Rebecca? That did you meet your husband when you came to work for Wall Street here in Brazil?
Yes.
Was he a colleague, or was he? How did you meet him?
So he was a colleague. We worked at the same school for a period, and then when we started dating, he went to a different school because that wasn't really ideal. But so in terms of what Peter was talking about, I found the same. You'll get out of your experience in Brazil what you put into it. And if you show that you respect the culture you try to speak Portuguese, even if you're terrible at it. I mean, I've lived in a lot of countries, and I don't know if I've ever got as positive a reception for simply trying to speak the local language. And this really encouraged me to learn Portuguese. I'm not fluent today. I'm not that talented in languages, but even today, yes, my husband's Brazilian and I work for a Brazilian company, but I still feel motivated to learn because of this really positive attitude that Brazilians that I met in Sao Paulo and at work had towards me speaking their language fairly poorly and just making that effort. But in terms of being treated differently, so I did feel a respect from my colleagues in regards to, like, they would greet each other in the morning with a hug and, the normal greeting. And then it would be explained to me, are you comfortable if I do this? A lot of people actually did do that. And then even now in Maple Bear, even though people know me, there's still jokes about whether or not it's okay to hug me or whatever. But it's all very respectful, and just, I think, a way of understanding that we have different cultures and we're all learning from one another.
That's great. We have a question here in the chat from Han. Thank you so much for the question. Could you provide the process to get the necessary documents to live and work in Brazil? How was the process to you before coming to Brazil in terms of acquiring the visa, getting everything settled down? And the question continues, any advice on how to get started? Was it challenging? So what was your experience when preparing your moving down to Brazil?
So Peter, you and I had totally different experiences. You go first, because I think I had an easier experience and I can explain why. So you tell yours first.
So when after speaking with school owners in Brazil, we reached an agreement that, yes, Peter, we want you to come and be principal in Belo Horizonte. We began the process of getting the visa to come to Brazil. And it started with a visitor's visa. But in order to get the work visa and a more permanent visa, I had to leave the country, do the documentation out of the Brazil consulate in Toronto. And it was quite an exercise in terms of getting the documents. I had to get my university transcripts. I had to get birth certificates, as I mentioned, education transcripts. It took a while and a number of trips to make sure that in traveling from where I lived to Toronto, that I had everything when I went to the embassy in Toronto. And I remember going there and they said, well, you don't have this. Oh, I forgot the doc. So I had to drove back to Toronto again, presented them with the documents. They were very helpful, very understanding, but they had their expectations of what I needed. And so while I could have had a company do it for me, it would not have sped up the process of getting the work visa. So it took a little bit of time. In the meantime, I was able to stay for a certain amount of time on the visitor's visa, return to Canada, and get the other visas that I needed in place. It was a little bit tricky at the beginning. I'm not sure if it has changed at all in terms of going to Brazil. In fact, I know that recently that they've no longer require the visitor's visa. I think you can just enter without the documents. Rebecca, correct me if I'm wrong. But then the work visa, it's a challenge to get the work visa with the documents you need personally, but also from the company that's going to employ you. But once you get that, you're good to go.
Yeah, the work permit process is very similar to, because we have people in Maple Bear that go through this process every couple of years. So this process is very similar to what I did in 2013 and what you would have done a few years ago, Peter. The work permit process, it's some type of permanent resident. I think it's a type 5 visa that they give you in Brazil. This hasn't changed very much. It is simpler to go as a tourist. Now, I didn't enter Brazil the same way as Peter. I didn't enter Brazil until I had my work visa stamped in my passport and was ready to go. I agree with Peter. It is bureaucratic. There's a lot of papers. I had to order a type of birth certificate in Canada that I would never use for anything in Canada, because in Canada, our birth certificates don't have our parents' middle names on them. So in order to get this, which was a requirement for Brazil, you have to order the long form Canadian birth certificate. And it's not something that is ultimately a big problem. We have a process for this, etc. It's just something that it's one more thing that you don't think about. And every type of document that you're used to thinking about in your Canadian way and what you need to open a bank here or whatever, you suddenly need a new document. And I had received work permits or visas for Korea and Japan and Russia, and I had still never needed that specific birth certificate before. All of that being said, the company that I worked for was part of Pearson International, and Pearson International had a relationship with a visa company that was international, and they provided end-to-end support, telling me exactly what I needed, the steps. They would review documents before I actually went into the consulate or the embassy in Canada to get the visa. So I didn't have the experience Peter had of showing up at the consulate and not having everything. So, I mean, the greatest advice I would give either to an organization hiring somebody or an individual that's trying to go it alone is it's worth every penny to hire a good company that first is going to make sure that you get to Brazil. And then once you get to Brazil, you need a CPF. You need to register with the federal police. It's so many little things. It's worth the money to hire professionals who can take care of this.
Great. So the two of you have already been in quite a few countries. Rebecca mentioned Russia, Japan. Peter was in Kuwait, that I know. And and among all your experiences, what makes Brazil unique? What did you find in Brazil that you didn't find anywhere else in the world?
I would say, again, I want to go back to the language. Brazil is certainly a culture that appreciates you making an effort to learn the language. And when you do that, you become part of that culture, as I mentioned before. But what made Brazil unique was the friendliness of the people. Yes, people are very respectful in other countries that I traveled to from Kuwait, but Brazil was like a warm blanket. The people were there to support you if you had an issue. For example, I was getting my hair cut, and I was trying to explain to the barber that I would like to have a short haircut, not too short, but a little bit here and a little bit out there. And right beside me was a gentleman who fortunately spoke English. He was able to tell the barber, hey, this is what he wants. But there were several instances of that. I was on Paulista Avenue at night, and I was trying to get back to my apartment, and I was turned around, and so I stopped somebody on the street. And he said, you know what? Where are you going? I said, this is where I want to go. He called an Uber for me. And then when I attempted to give him some money for the Uber, he said, no, this is my pleasure to welcome you to Brazil, and let me do this for you. So, it was that kind of experience that reinforced my opinion of the people in Sao Paulo, but also in Brazil. They were very special, they were very warm, and they were very helpful. So it was interesting too. I have to tell you, I was very fortunate to have a car in Belo Horizonte. So I would drive out to the country where we had a campus, and wouldn't you know it, I was driving along on a Saturday morning, and I was pulled over by a policeman, and I thought, oh my gosh, I'm really in trouble. And so I said in my limited Portuguese that I really don't speak Portuguese, I speak English. Well, he said, where are you from? And I said, well, I'm from Canada, near Toronto. Oh no, I was with the Brazilian delegation in Toronto at the Pan Am Games. He said, oh my gosh, we had a wonderful time in Toronto. The people are so nice. And so he talked about that. And then he said, come with me. And he showed me the office. And then he took his gun out. He showed me his gun, how the gun worked. And he showed me the bullets. And he was so friendly. And he said, listen, it's wonderful to have you in our country. Please remember to have your headlights on the highway when you're driving along it. And he let me go. Mm-hmm. So, those are three instances where, the people have been so accepting of an older gentleman perhaps, but certainly of a foreigner who has joined the country and is becoming part of of living there and joining in with other people there, whether they're Canadians, other nationalities, or Brazilians. So those are just fabulous remembrances from my limited experience in Brazil, but they stand out. They're very important to me.
How about you, Rebecca? What did you find in Brazil that you think that, it was completely different from Russia, or that you didn't find anywhere else in the world? Do you have anything that you can recall?
Yeah, so, like other countries I've lived in, and even like Canada, but Brazil has had, throughout history and modern times, you have many challenges facing Brazil. And when you look at some of the education and other quality of life indicators in Brazil, these are areas that Brazil still has a lot of room to improve. Yet in spite of this, Brazil is the happiest place I've ever lived. I don't know if I've ever met people that get as much out of life, that kind of enjoy every moment that can be enjoyed. It was a really interesting contrast, not just to Russia, which is a lot colder and culturally the people are a lot harder, but also to Canada, where, yeah, Canadians have a reputation for being friendly, but we are kind of a cold culture compared with Brazil. A Canadian will make small talk with you or whatever, but we're much less likely to directly, honestly tell you how we feel about something. We'll tell you our factual opinion on how something should go, or we'll be very direct at work, but we aren't warm in the same way. And that was something, to just give a little anecdote, my first Christmas in Brazil came about 4 or 5 weeks after I arrived in Brazil. And one of my colleagues invited me to join her and her family on December 24th for their Christmas celebration. So I actually got to see how a Brazilian family celebrates Christmas, and I could see the ways that was different from Canada. And it was just, I know we keep repeating it, Peter and I, but it was just so warm and it was so welcoming. And this component was it was similar to what I received in Korea, where people would welcome you into their homes and really wanted you to get to experience and enjoy these little moments of life together with them as much as they get to. So, I mean, that to me was very special when I look back at my best memories in Brazil. They involve experiences like that with Brazilians sharing these moments.
Well, I had the, go on, Peter, please.
Oh, I'm sorry, Rafael. One of the most intriguing customs was lunch. In Canada, you have breakfast, you might have a sandwich at lunch, and then of course you have the big meal at 5 o'clock. So when I started working in Brazil, all of a sudden everybody left around 12 o'clock. I said, where are you going?
Where are you all going at the same time?
Exactly. And so they were all going out for lunch, and they would go to different places, enjoy a wonderful buffet or other kind of restaurant, and then come back and work, till 7 o'clock. And then they would go home and perhaps have a dessert or maybe have another small meal. So that was, Rafael, as I look back, that was something that was new for me and for Rebecca, I'm sure too, that how important this lunch meal is for people in Brazil. A very important time of the day.
I had to restructure the lunch schedules because I came to a school and I was the only one in the school that didn't speak any Portuguese. And I'm doing some work and I looked up and I noticed, wait a second, everybody's left. Surely they haven't all left at the same time. And I was the only one there that was available to answer a phone. So I had to kind of find a delicate way to say, okay, we need to maintain your lunch culture. I understand that's important to you, but you can't literally all go at the same time. But learning about how this works, and I mean, in Canada, it's so normal to have either a really tiny lunch or not really enjoy and take the lunch. And this goes back to Brazilians taking the opportunity to enjoy these moments of life when you have them. that we don't really do in Canada.
Well, that's
yeah.
a very good point, Rebecca. Just the opportunity to socialize and break away from the office, but to enjoy each other's company, outside of the office. So that was wonderful, and I started looking forward to it all the time.
Mhm. When I started working with the Canadian team, one thing that stood out for me was, how Canadian professionals are very collaborative. They, really like to work together. Everyone have their turn to speak, and everyone listens to everyone else's opinions. And this was really a very positive, because I came from a country, a company that had a completely different culture, that really have a very strong hierarchy. That you have someone as, okay, you have the president, you have the director. There are concerns whenever you dispute an opinion with someone who has a higher rank than yourselves. And I soon learned that, working with Canadian professionals, this really doesn't matter, that you can always speak your mind, and, everyone can take that very professionally, and, that the main goal is to achieve the best possible results in every situation. This was something that really stood out for me. And another point was the, good mood that Canadians were always in. And that how the office and the central office really became way more fun to work in when you had the Canadian team, and that everyone just talking about lots of things and differences and things like that. I remember that once John Farrell was here in Brazil, and he had a big trouble. He tripped on the sidewalk, and he hit his face on the sidewalk, and he broke his nose. And they said, "Well, geez, we have to take him to the hospital." And did say, and when he came out of the hospital, he just said, "Oh, I really wanted to leave a mark in Brazil, but this would have been much easier if the cement was not so hard." And so always is such a good mood, and so friendly. It was really a very nice experience. When you visit different Brazilian regions, did you see differences, regional differences between accents, for example, or between cultures? Because Brazil is very vast. We have lots of different cultures inside one same country. Did you perceive that, and did you have a favorite region to visit, or a favorite city?
For sure. I was fortunate to be able to travel as far south as Porto Alegre, and as far north as Boa Vista. And I spent, I was blessed to have 3 trips to Manaus, probably 5 trips to Rio or more. And so each of those regions stood out a little bit differently. For me, I couldn't tell the difference in the pronunciation of the language, just as I couldn't tell the difference in the different kinds of cachaça. I can't differentiate between them. But I noticed certainly in Rio, the beauty of Rio de Janeiro and a history. Going to João Pessoa and Maceió, Salvador, the wonderful beaches, and in Salvador, the old town, visiting that. But going to Manaus was probably the most special for me. Manaus with its history, with the river, and all of the shops on the river, the markets. So Manaus was very special for me, and it was a place that I wanted to bring my wife to if I'd stayed in Brazil a little bit longer. But if I have a recollection outside of Sao Paulo and Rio, it would be Manaus with the indigenous people there, and with the people that I met there. It was a very, very special place for me, and a place that that I would really like to return to spend more time.
Great. How about you, Rebecca? Do you have a favorite region in Brazil?
I didn't have the opportunity to travel Brazil as much as Peter, so I was only in Sao Paulo state and in Rio. And I guess also in Rio, state of Rio de Janeiro. Ilha Bela is there, right? Oh, that's not true. I went to Foz de Iguaçu as well.
Okay.
So I can say Foz de Iguaçu puts Niagara Falls to shame. I was surprised when I went to Foz de Iguaçu. I'm like, I've heard of this place, but I mean, bless it, Niagara Falls is beautiful. If you're ever in Canada, you should definitely visit it. But upon seeing Foz de Iguaçu, I thought, why is anyone ever talking about Niagara Falls at all? This is 100 Niagara Falls lined up beside each other in a tropical area. It's so beautiful. Never seen anything like it. So in terms of trips, that was my favorite one. And like I said, you guys have us beat. You have Niagara Falls beat in that regard.
Well, there is something that you're never going to see in Foz do Iguaçu. I saw Niagara Falls frozen, you know, the huge amount of water, and it is beautiful as well. It's not as big as Foz do Iguaçu, but it's, you know, to see it frozen is really interesting.
That's true.
Well, it was amazing when you told me the number of things that you did, Rafael, when you were in Canada in such a short time. I don't think Rebecca and I could ever accomplish in such a short time what you did. And of course, that may have been your first time, but you navigated with your excellent English. You navigated all of the destinations very successfully. So, man, I admire you that you were able to do that. And you were telling me things that, you know, you reinforced my perceptions of my own country.
And so what about the similarities? What did you find in Brazil that was, you know, that you expected that it was going to be different, that you didn't know, but you just saw, okay, this is exactly the same. This is, I feel like, you know, I'm home when I see this or when I do this, or do you have any such experiences that, you know, you know, finding that Canada and Brazil are very similar. In which aspects would you think?
I would say that either transportation, the shopping, the bars and restaurants, they were different, but very, very much similarities. One thing that we don't have in Canada is Cinco de Marco. Which is my favorite destination for shopping on the weekends. Cinco de Marco was so vibrant with so many people and so many different places to visit. And when I went there every Saturday, I discovered a new part of that downtown area. So the history that you have in Brazil, the opportunities to visit so many different destinations. That is what is different. The similarities, as I mentioned, the bars, the restaurants, the transportation, but I would say there's more differences in Brazil that are to be appreciated and enjoyed than perhaps in Canada, where so many things are much the same. So there are similarities, but there's a lot of differences that a visitor would embrace and say, holy, I wish we had this in Canada.
In Brazil, of course, you have a much, at least in the part of Brazil I lived in, you have a much nicer climate than we have in Toronto. So in Toronto, we only have about 2-3 months that you can sit on a patio and have a beer and enjoy food with your friends. If we could do it year round, we would. Patio season in Canada is huge. So this is a similarity that it's only different because you don't want to do it in winter here, at least I don't. Some people do want to drink outside when it's -20. In terms of the food culture, Peter talked about, so the lunch, the way lunch is done in Brazil is different from Canada, but the type of food that you eat, you know, some meat, some rice, very savory. This is more similar to what I would what I grew up eating, you know, having a pork chop and some rice, or having some potatoes and some beef. So the food adjustment was quite simple. I just found in Brazil that I ate a lot more of it because the food was so good and it was so fresh. And of course, you have access to fruits and vegetables, fruits more that we can't get fresh here. So a lot of the things that were different really came down to climate in that regard.
That's
Okay,
a good point,
great.
Rebecca. Yeah, and if I could, Rafael, we have 4 seasons in Canada, as you know, and you have 4 seasons in Brazil. So that's a similarity, but it's different in that, you know, it's a different time of the year and different lengths of the seasons and different temperatures. So it was a little bit difficult to understand that December was summer and that July was winter. So again, that's very typical. We have the same, but it's different.
Okay, great. And now you're back in Canada. So do people ask you about what was like in Brazil? Do you feel that Canadians are curious to know more about Brazil? Do you feel that yourselves are Brazilian ambassadors now, just, you know, promoting the country? I don't know, when you mention, oh, I lived in Brazil for a while, so do people get surprised and ask you what the experience was like? So how does it work?
Yeah, good question, Rafael. So look what I'm wearing. You see what I'm wearing? I'm wearing this. I think this is the Brazilian, one of the jerseys. So absolutely. So what was it like? What was Brazil? Like the first words that come out of my mouth, and Rebecca and I talked about, wonderful, wonderful country, wonderful people, wonderful food. So, and say, oh yeah, we got to get there. But again, Brazil isn't on the radar of many people that I've talked to. But what is interesting, I've met some people from Brazil who live here in the city that I live in. And we've been able to establish a connection based on my experience there and their experience here. So, so I think, you know, the people that I talk to, my family for sure, but the people that ask me about my experience in education, but also in Brazil, they're able to understand what a wonderful country it is, that it is safe in spite of some of the things that you might hear. But, you know, Canada can be dangerous as well if you're out in an area you shouldn't be in midnight. Well, that's the same in any country. Kuwait, Japan, I'm sure. But I felt totally safe at all parts of the day and early evening in all parts of Brazil. I walked everywhere, and mind you, I looked around and checked my surroundings. But I think from that experience, with the 4 years, they're wonderful people in both Belo Horizonte and Maple Bear Central Office, Sao Paulo, the best educational team I've ever worked with. That has just given me a wonderful experience that I'm able to share with people and say, if you haven't been, you've got to go.
And I echo what Peter said in terms of being a positive ambassador for Brazil. Anytime I'm asked about my experience in Brazil, I'm very positive. I would encourage anyone to go visit. In fact, a friend of mine recently was choosing between a teaching location in Salvador and one in Beirut. And I said, no disrespect to Beirut, go to Salvador. It has everything you want: music, food, people, climate. Go to Salvador. And I like to think I helped convince her to go there where she's teaching. That being said, I don't feel Brazilian. I'm not Brazilian. But I also don't really feel Canadian anymore. I spent 10 years of my adult life living in different countries. I feel multicultural. I live in Toronto, where there are a lot of immigrants and a lot of first-generation Canadians, and I feel closer to immigrants and first-generation Canadians than I do. I'm from a small town outside of Toronto. I feel more connected to these people than I do the people from my hometown at this point.
Oh, that's very interesting. And did you get to know other Canadians while you were here in Brazil? Did you meet anyone here? Did you associate with other Canadians? How was it, or just Brazilians apart from the central office?
I did
I remember
mostly
traveling.
Brazilian for me. Go ahead, Peter.
I'm sorry, Rebecca. I traveled to Porto Alegre, as I mentioned, and I had on my suitcase, my check bag, my carry-on bag, a Canadian emblem. And so I was waiting for an Uber, and this gentleman beside me said, "Hey, you're from Canada, eh?" And so he was from a city that was about 50 kilometers from where I live. And so we started talking, and then we ended up sharing a cab and an Uber in Porto Alegre. And then he lived in Sao Paulo, and I lived in Sao Paulo. So after his business and mine, we hooked up in Sao Paulo, and we got together on 2 or 3 occasions to share our experiences about living in Brazil. And he had been there for about 4 years, and he was very bilingual. He was bilingual, and so he was helping me with my Portuguese and the important phrases and things that I should keep in mind. And so I met him, and of course other people at the office. But in traveling, I think if you had displayed a Canadian, you were more likely to meet people with a shirt that you were wearing or a tag that may be on your baggage.
How about you, Rebecca? Did you meet anyone, any other Canadians, or did you feel tempted to just spend more time with other people from Canada rather than with Brazilians? Did you feel more at home? How do you feel about that?
With Maple Bear, I've met Canadians who lived or have lived in Brazil. But when I was living in Brazil, initially my boss was from England. My supervisor rather was from England. My roommate initially was American, but I didn't know any Canadians, and I didn't seek them out because the other countries I had lived in, I had existed kind of in an expatriate bubble, and all my friends had been North American and British. And 1, I didn't want to replicate that, but 2, I didn't need to because I taught at an English school. I already had access to a pool of adults that could speak English at a high level who wanted to take me out to do things. So I made friends with Brazilians, I dated Brazilians, and then eventually I married a Brazilian. And of course, I did make friends in the expat community in Sao Paulo because it's impossible not to be drawn to that as an expat. You find people who have the same experiences as you, but they weren't Canadian, they were British.
Okay. And the other, just we are about, it's unbelievable, but it has already been 1 hour, so we are about to end the panel. Really so quick. And but just one last question: did you guys meet any other Brazilians prior to coming to Brazil? Did you have this, contact with Brazilians before getting to get down to Brazil, or you just met Brazilians the first time when you arrived?
I'm looking back, before I came to Brazil, I was in the Middle East, and we had teachers at our school in Kuwait from different countries. But in my travels, I would have to say I had not met other people from Brazil that I remember. Of course, I hadn't been to Brazil, so it hadn't been on my radar. When I look back, I thought, South America, oh, that's so far away. But it really isn't, 10 hours from Toronto to Sao Paulo. So it's very close. But no, I had not had the opportunity to meet people from Brazil or South America before coming to Brazil.
And I'm like Peter as well. I went to Brazil without having really had that opportunity to meet or befriend Brazilians before going to Brazil. But I did meet a friend of mine in Russia who encouraged me to apply for the intercompany transfer with from the UK, but she was obsessed with Brazil, and she acted as a huge advocate for Brazil, and is part of the reason I ended up going there. So I didn't get to meet a Brazilian, but I got to meet someone who pushed me forward to go there.
Ambassador, wow, that's great to hear. Well, Peter, Rebecca, thank you so much for sharing with us your experiences. It has been way too quick, but very nice to be in touch with you again. Just as a last remark, there is now through the Brazilian Week in CCBC, a band is going to start to play with Flávia Nascimento and Diogo Ramos. So it's the same link. So if you can continue and watch the band, it's been a great event. Thank you so much, Peter. Thank you, Rebecca. Hope to see you again soon.
Thank you.
Nice to see you, Rafael. Thank you for moderating. Hope to see you.
Bye-bye, everyone. Thank you so much for participating.